Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today is a subject that I have probably touched on here and there, but I don't know if I've done a deep dive into it before, and it's the subject of autoimmunity. I speak about things like thyroid conditions and skin conditions like psoriasis, and they are examples of a few autoimmune conditions, but there are many more, and I want today to talk about the three things, the trio of factors that can contribute to you developing autoimmune conditions, whether you do have Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, psoriasis, or some of the other ones, just as examples, are lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, celiac disease. You might have multiple sclerosis, ulcerative colitis, type 1 diabetes. Those are some of the most common ones. Some practitioners, and I agree with this, also put endometriosis into an autoimmune-like condition. I don't know if it's formally in that category yet, but there's a lot of similar processes going on. So I have seen these three factors to be very true and present in literally everyone with a diagnosis, or maybe you don't have a formal diagnosis because that can take years. Sometimes with thyroid issues, it takes 10, 20, 30 years to be diagnosed from when symptoms start, which is really sad. And doctors don't really test thyroid antibodies that often and explore the autoimmune world because with the thyroid condition, that example, the same treatment is going to be levothyroxine, whether it is autoimmune in nature or not. 9 out of 10 cases of thyroid conditions, I'd say, are autoimmune in nature. And then there's just that small percentage where someone's thyroid is off from stress, it's off from nutrient deficiencies, they just don't have enough building blocks to make thyroid hormone. But a lot of the time, it's actually driven by an autoimmune condition. So I'd say 8 to 9 out of 10 times it is going to be the immune system that's the problem. That's why it changes the treatment from a holistic or naturopathic perspective. Because if you just give more thyroid hormone and you don't figure out why there is this attack on the thyroid anyway, because that's what an autoimmune condition is, we're told that it's just genetic and it's bad luck and it can just develop randomly. There's really no such thing as coincidences and the body making mistakes. The body is meant to, and it is the most intelligent mechanism out there. It is wise. It knows how to heal. It's designed to heal. So when it's not, and especially when it's starting to attack its own body's tissue, that just doesn't make sense evolutionarily. So what is actually happening is that the immune system, sorry, is trying to attack something else. It's trying to fight some sort of infection, some sort of toxin, some sort of stress and trauma. Something's going on under the surface. And I describe it to my clients as being like the castle guards. So imagine a castle, and surrounding the castle are the castle guards, and they're designed to keep the castle safe and protect it against invaders. This is like the immune system. But imagine those castle guards being completely sleep deprived. They are undernourished, they've not been eating right, they have so much going on, they're not feeling good, they've been on the job and hypervigilant for years on end. They're going to start to become dysfunctional. They're going to start either not shooting at the right things and firing at the right things and mistakenly attacking the good things. So we are exposed all day, every day to toxins and threats and viruses. Some are more serious than others, but it's the immune system that should be regulated and in this balanced state, not so hypervigilant that it's seeing everything as a threat, foods and supplements and changes in temperature, just throwing the immune system off. That's getting more towards autoimmune spectrum or allergic type states. Histamine, mast cell activation would fall into that, where it's just going overboard and extreme. We also don't want it to be underfunctioning, where we're picking up every little bug and cough and cold, and you're that person who always gets every illness that's going around. That's not good either. We don't want to swing the immune system one way or the other. It should be a nice seesaw. So there's a side called the Th1 side, there's a side called the Th2 side, and certain autoimmune conditions can fall into dominance in either one. So for some examples, type 1 dominant, Th1 dominant can be conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, MS, type 1 diabetes, and Hashimoto's. with the autoimmune conditions, and type 2 Th2 dominant tends to be things like lupus, Sjogren's syndrome, and ulcerative colitis. The goal should be to find immune balance. People with autoimmune conditions need to be careful as well with certain herbal formulas because they can push up one side or the other. They can really stimulate the Th2, but if you have ulcerative colitis, that might not be the best thing for you because you're already tipped and skewed in that direction. I did a post about this a couple of years ago, I think, or maybe it was last year actually, in winter time, just talking about people taking random herbs, and that can be great. And I'd rather you take a natural formula, but if you have autoimmunity, you need to be a little bit more cautious with what you're taking and just understand that your body right now is a little bit more sensitive and you just need to work with it. So the goal is finding immune balance, immune regulation, and getting the seesaw to more of a level. You can't get rid of the genetic predisposition. This is one of the three markers and risk factors is a genetic predisposition, but a lot of people have the genetics for autoimmunity and they don't ever express. So this is epigenetics. The blueprint is there, but our body doesn't have to necessarily follow that, and we can change whether those genes are expressed or not. There's only 5 to 10% of conditions, cancer, autoimmunity, neurological disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all of that, only 5 to 10% are linked to genetics. 90 to 95% of those conditions are driven and caused by environment. And that term environment does encompass a lot of different things. The food that you're eating, the toxins that you're exposed to, the health of your gut, because your gut is where 70 to 80% of your immune system lives. So throughout this episode, we're going to be talking about gut health quite a lot. That's why I talk about it in most episodes. But even our thoughts, our emotions, expressed emotions, suppressed emotions, these can influence our genes as well. I really love the work of Bruce Lipton and Dr. Joe Dispenza for this, so look into their work if you haven't already. As we go through this episode, please remember, little disclaimer to start, I am not a doctor. I don't cure, I don't diagnose, and I don't prescribe medication. But I do see the naturopathic and functional medicine world that I work in being really amazing at helping people with autoimmune conditions. The traditional conventional route for these conditions can often be very intense, and just living with one of these conditions can be pretty intense, and there's degrees of severity for each one. We could have someone with autoimmune thyroid and they are just experiencing a little bit of fatigue, and we catch it pretty early on and we see that the antibodies have started to elevate. But then there's people who are really struggling, and symptoms with that condition can really span from head to toe because there's a thyroid receptor on every single cell of the body. So when the thyroid is even slightly off, it can affect everything from the tip of the head, literally with hair growth, brain function, to the bottom of the feet, plantar fasciitis, weird pains with the ankle, dry skin on the feet. It can just cause a lot of chaos. So as we go through, just remember the little disclaimer, this is just for educational purposes only, and I recommend working with your practitioner if you're going to make any changes to your protocol. So going back to the conventional approach to treatment, there's a time and a place. Some people do need to be on thyroid medication if their thyroid is underfunctioning. Like someone with type 1 diabetes, they need to take insulin, otherwise they're going to die. At least early on, until things are more controlled. I do know of people who've been able to get off medication, not with my help. That's not my area of expertise. But I do know that it's possible, and I just believe anything is possible now. After what I have witnessed and just heard from other people in this world, I want to share that message of hope. But if you have to spend some time on a medication just to help you feel good and be able to show up to work or look after your family or get a good night's sleep, I think that is absolutely fine as long as you are continuing to investigate and work on the underlying cause. The problem that I have is when people just take the medication and they are suppressing the symptoms. They are relieving the pains and the skin conditions and the inflammation, but that fire is still going on under the surface. So that's where I have a problem. It's like if a warning light came on your dashboard of your car and you just put a plaster over the top and it's out of sight, out of mind, but you can't do that with your body unless you're going to expect it to start to break down over time and start to scream louder and louder at you when you ignore the little warning signals to begin with. The main medications from a conventional approach, it depends what the condition is, but if it's psoriasis, it could be some sort of immune suppressant. They just tend to do that with a lot of them. Just the immune system's faulty, it's causing a lot of chaos and it is contributing to symptoms, so let's just shut it down. Let's just go on immune suppressant medications. And that might relieve symptoms, but it's just making everything a million times worse, and you haven't removed the actual cause, the triggers. There's usually not just one either. There's not just one thing that you're missing. So it's like if you are in pain because you have a rock in your shoe, instead of taking painkillers to get rid of the pain, why don't we just take the shoe off and get rid of the rock and we'll be free of pain that way. So it can be more work and it can take some changes to your diet and lifestyle and the way that you're living your life, but freedom from these types of conditions can get your life back. And the longer that you've had the condition, the more severe your symptoms are. You're going to have to give it longer. You can't expect your body to just miraculously heal within a few weeks of going gluten-free or cleaning up your toxic exposure. You have to be realistic. And if you might have only had a diagnosis of your condition last year, but if you've had symptoms of fatigue or health imbalances for the past 20, please be patient with your body and know that healing is possible, but it is different when you're coming from a root cause perspective and you're really looking at the underlying imbalances. You're not just taking a quick fix approach. If it's a skin condition, they might also give you topical creams in the form of steroids and anti-inflammatories again. And yeah, time and a place. I've used antihistamines and painkillers when I've had different things going on over the years, but it's not my go-to anymore. And I know that I really need it when I turn to something like an antihistamine because sometimes the herbal things just don't cut it. But I always at least understand what led me to a histamine flare-up. It's very few and far between these days, but I am so glad that conventional medicine and the pharmaceutical world exists for those situations, but we really want to start to listen to the body. So the three things that are needed to develop an autoimmune condition or have an active autoimmune condition, number one is the genetic predisposition. I've just mentioned this. You might have a super strong family history of celiac disease. You might have a really strong family history on your mum's side of thyroid conditions. You might not know if it's autoimmune or not, but you can just assume that there's probably some level of autoimmune or a genetic component involved. But your genes aren't necessarily your destiny. You're not doomed to also develop that if your family history is quite strong. It just shows where your vulnerabilities might lie. And when your body is out of whack, those are the areas that might tend to crop up. For me, it's the thyroid side of things, and then that connection with the liver, the gallbladder, and bile. My nan, so my mum's mum and my grandma both had their gallbladders removed. My mum luckily still kept hers because she lived a bit of a healthier lifestyle than they did. And when my body was really out of whack, and even around the time of my breakup earlier this year, when I was going through some stress and just not eating right for a few weeks, I could feel my gallbladder started to go off. I did share more about this, and I took some gallbladder support because I realized I was getting a lot of peeling skin at the side of my nails. And to me, that indicates an issue with my fatty acid absorption. I knew that I was eating enough fatty acids like cod liver oil, butter, eggs, so it was more that I wasn't absorbing it. I took bile support and liver supportive nutrients for a few weeks and that resolved it. So I just tune in and I nip something in the bud as soon as it starts now. If you're not trained in this, I don't expect you to know what to look out for and know exactly what the next step should be. That's why working with a good practitioner is recommended, because they can educate you and teach you how to take care of yourself and figure out what works best for you. With the genetics, though, if someone has a strong family history of arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and I asked them a little bit more about the family and the types of career that the parents had. Like, what industry did your parents work in? How did they manage stress? What types of foods did you grow up eating? A lot of the time, it's actually not the genes that are passed down, it's the lifestyle and the behaviors and the habits and the trauma, the generational trauma that can be passed down as well, or just your mum's really hyper vigilant stress state growing up, and even when you were in utero, when she was pregnant with you, that could have really aroused the nervous system. And that's more, to me, more likely driving an autoimmune condition than the actual gene itself. Because if your body is constantly feeling unsafe, then that is going to be triggering some genes that aren't really supportive. They're going to be turning on the pro-inflammatory pathways and turning off the heal and thriving pathways in the body. So is it actually the genes that have been passed down for psoriasis and Hashimoto's thyroiditis or lupus, or is it actually that you eat very similar meals to your family and you've been eating gluten your whole life and you're sensitive under the surface and didn't realize? Is it that you have a very similar response to stress that your dad did and you never released your emotions? You were taught to shove it down. You've carried on these perfectionist behaviors. I pay more attention to that with clients than the actual genes themselves. And we can turn on and turn off our genes. So it's not like they turn on and then they just stay on forever. They can be turned off as well. I really love the work of Ben Lynch, Dr. Ben Lynch, and his company Seeking Health. They have a supplement line. They also have a really good book called Dirty Genes that talks all about genetic expression. So that's a good one if you have autoimmune conditions. And in my life, I have autoimmune genes on both sides of the family. My dad's side has more psoriasis genes. My dad had psoriasis previously, it's kind of under control now. His sister has it quite bad, and his dad had it quite bad as well. And then on my mum's side, it's more thyroid and autoimmune Hashimoto's, as I said. My nan and my grandma never tested for Hashimoto's because that wasn't a thing, but based on the symptoms, it's very, very, very likely that they had it too. So for me, I currently don't have any autoimmune conditions, but when my health was quite bad, 5 to 10 years ago, I was starting to show signs of that. I never went down the full testing route because it can just be quite expensive, and I just didn't really want any diagnosis, and I knew that that wasn't going to be helpful just to get a diagnosis because I wasn't going to take a medication for it. But my thyroid antibodies, when I tested them privately, they were starting to be more elevated. They're now in a normal range, which is good. But if I would have just not done anything about that, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, they could have really gone up into the hundreds, thousands range, and I could have been on my way to developing hypothyroidism later on in life. But I know my predispositions. I know these parts of my body that could be a little bit off, just my immune system in general. I need to be more careful about that. I take really good care of my gut as much as I can. I choose to be gluten-free because that is one thing. We'll come on to the next point, but gluten is one thing that can be a trigger for autoimmune conditions, regardless of what it is, because of the effect that it has on the gut lining and the immune system. There's a particularly strong connection with Hashimoto's. It'll probably be the same with all of them, but this has been the most studied and the most tested out of all, obviously apart from celiac, because that is an autoimmune response to gluten, and that damages the gut lining. It depends on where the autoimmune attack is happening as to what the condition is. So if it's Hashimoto's, it's the thyroid gland that's being affected. If it's rheumatoid arthritis, it's the joints. If it's psoriasis, it's the skin, and so on. Some of them do affect multiple different body parts. But I choose now to be aware of my predispositions, but I don't think that I am doomed to get that. I'm not going into it expecting to develop a condition. I know that my parents both had imbalances and things that they could have worked on to prevent that from happening. And I can choose now to be proactive and do testing every year, like I do, to check in on my thyroid and be able to see day to day with my symptoms how I'm feeling. And we're not aiming for perfection here, but if my cycles start to go a little bit off, or I start to get some energy crashes in the afternoon, or my skin just isn't as good as it had been, then I will start to pay attention and really catch things early on, because being proactive instead of reactive is the way forward. I just want to check, are you addressing the healing foundations? Not sure what I mean? Well, these are the important factors that I believe that you need to address in order to be in optimal health and overcome your stubborn health issues and symptoms, whether that's chronic digestive issues, acne, hair loss, period problems, weight gain, anxiety, fatigue. I could go on. Because I want as many of you as possible to have this life-changing information, I've bundled together 6 of my juiciest and info-packed masterclasses priced at just £111. Not only are you getting these recordings, which are between 60 and 90 minutes long each, on the following subjects: the power of the subconscious mind, stress, trauma, and the nervous system, supporting your female menstrual cycle, mastering your metabolism, optimizing sleep, gut health and detox. You're also going to receive my healthy groceries shopping list and my favorite non-toxic products guide, which are both usually reserved for my one-to-one clients. Whether you're brand new to the holistic healing world or you've been trying to work on things for a while but feel stuck, I can guarantee there's something within this content that will help you to understand your next steps and what you're missing. Sometimes it's something so foundational that's being overlooked. Get instant access to the Foundations bundle today for just £111 by clicking the link in the episode show notes, and I can't wait to hear about what you've learned. Grab your pen and paper to make notes and get started today. So bringing us on to number 2, the second thing that you need to have in order to develop a autoimmune condition and to have an active autoimmune condition is a leaky gut. And this is also something that is in your control. So the genetics, kind of like, you do have control over your genetic expression and epigenetics, but there's that blueprint that you can't get rid of the gene, but you can influence whether it's turned on or turned off with the majority of genetic conditions. So that one's a bit like you have some control, but not 100%. The next 2, you do have control over the majority of the time. So the second thing is you have to have a leaky gut. Intestinal permeability is the scientific term in order to have an autoimmune disease. Gluten is a trigger for leaky gut in everyone that consumes it. Dr. Fasano did studies, and he studies autoimmune and gluten quite a lot. And I'm sure it was his study that showed every single person in the study who ate gluten had a leaky gut and an intestinal permeability response after consuming gluten. It just depends on how long it goes on for. For some people, it's 5 minutes. For people with celiac or a gluten allergy or autoimmune, it could be for months after a single exposure to gluten. So I choose having the genetic predisposition to remain gluten-free because that is one thing that I do have control over the majority of the time. If I can get a cross-contamination, I'm just not aware of it, then that's a bit out of my control. But what I choose to put inside my body every day is gluten-free. For a few months, when I was maybe a couple of years ago or last year, I was starting to have a little bit more gluten because I actually felt fine. Previously, when I'd have bits of gluten, I would get symptoms. I'd get bloated, I'd get joint pain, I'd get really brain foggy. But then I started to just become less strict with it and I felt fine, didn't get the brain fog anymore, didn't get the joint pain. So it wasn't anything major, but just eating out at restaurants, if they had a little bit of flour in the gravy or the sauce, I'd just get it. But then I did a stool test, and this stool test that I used, the GI map, it does look at anti-gliadin antibody. This is the antibody to gluten, and it was showing a very high reaction, even with that tiny exposure that I was having. So that was enough for me to just open my eyes again and realize what I was doing. It's not the worst thing in the world, and it's not like I was eating a Warburton's loaf every week, but it just showed me again that I can't control some things in life. I can't control big global pandemics and the environmental pollution, but I can control the types of pollution and chemicals that I'm exposed to in my home massively. I can't control big stresses with the government and the external world, but I can control how I react and how I respond and whether I let that derail me completely. So just control the controllables, and anything that's not in your control, just let it slide. You just have to do the best that you can. If you think of this overall toxic bucket, or we can frame it as an inflammation bucket, the more good stuff you put in, or a bank account is maybe a better analogy for this. The more good you put into the bank account, the more deposits you make, that means that you have more reserves to pull from during times of stress. And when you're out and about and the food options aren't amazing, you then aren't just pulling from an empty account. If you've never made any good decisions and you're always just withdrawing, you're going to end up bankrupt. Whereas the little micro decisions and changes and upgrades that you can make in your food, going to bed an hour earlier, choosing to read a book instead of scroll on TikTok for another hour, that is all adding to your bank account, and that is all adding to your reserves and your state of health. So make the tiny little shifts, they do add up, I promise. The other things that can contribute to a leaky gut are medication use. Another reason why pharmaceuticals aren't my first go-to when I get a headache or when I get a histamine reaction. I will try my best to do the natural things first. I use homeopathy, I use vitamins, I use herbs, I use herbal teas, I use detox practices and coffee enemas and castor oil packs to see how much progress I can make. And then if needed, I will take a medication. I'm not completely against them, but the issue that I see is people just pop them like candy. They don't even think what they're taking. They take them proactively or preventatively. I see people going on trips, going on holidays, and they think they might get a little bit of back pain, so they're just taking mega doses of ibuprofen before a flight or before someone's period. They're already just taking medication just in case, and the slightest little bit of a headache, before they even reach for a glass of water to see if that makes a difference or just taking some deep breaths, they will just automatically take a painkiller. And that is where I have an issue. So just be mindful of your medication intake, know that there are risks involved, and if you are at the point where you're on a few different medications, just please go and get them reviewed and make sure that you actually do need to be on them and that you're exploring more natural, holistic side of things. The third or fourth leading cause of death worldwide is medical negligence and medication reactions. But who talks about that? We don't hear that, do we? We hear about the red meat being the problem and eggs and salt. And yeah, number 3 or 4 leading cause of death are medical errors and negligence in that area. So just try to avoid them as much as possible, and the holistic world can thrive and be the place where you see a lot of improvements with these types of conditions, more lifestyle driven conditions, and then the conventional world, A&E, pharmaceuticals are where it's at if you are in a car accident, if you need to have surgery. That's why it's there. It should be as a focus on accidents and emergencies, but not these conditions linked to nutrition and stress and trauma. Another thing that can contribute to leaky gut, intestinal permeability, are things like stress, pathogens in the gut, pesticides, toxins. So clearing up and cleaning up your environment as much as possible, doing the deeper work with a practitioner like myself on your gut health. There are certain bacteria in the gut, certain parasites and pathogens that can be linked to different autoimmune conditions. So what's happening with the leaky gut is that the gut lining is what separates you versus the environment. There is so much immune tissue in the gastrointestinal tract. This is what keeps your gut contents, so the undigested food and waste products, and keeps it separate from your bloodstream. But it's semi-permeable. Imagine it being like a fishing net. So there's tiny little holes in the fishing net that help the water pass through. This helps nutrients to pass in through the bloodstream. It extracts the good stuff, but there shouldn't be these large tears and holes in the fishing net because that's going to allow bigger things like the big fish and creatures to get in there, and they shouldn't really be in there. So it's when there's these rips and tears in the gut lining from gluten, stress, pesticides in the environment, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory painkillers, birth control pills, all of that, that can damage the gut lining. And then contents of the intestines that shouldn't really be getting into the bloodstream trigger a systemic immune response. Your immune cells that are floating around in the bloodstream are detecting things and attacking things that shouldn't be there, or food particles that aren't fully broken down to the basic state. Imagine that as being like a pearl necklace. When we eat food, the structure of the food is like a pearl necklace, all of the different individual pearls. Our digestion should break that down into individual pearls. But if you have a leaky gut, those larger pearl segments are making their way into the bloodstream. The body doesn't recognize them in that state. It flags them and tags them as being unsafe, dangerous, a foreign invader, and it will start an immune attack on your body. It will start to go rogue and start to get confused. And rather than attacking the piece of bread, it starts to misfire at your own body tissue. The gluten and thyroid connection, again, if you want to search molecular mimicry, this will explain it a little bit more. But imagine that string of pearls if you've eaten a loaf of bread. So once it gets through the stomach and into the intestines, imagine it just being like a string of pearls with a code on there. And the code might be ABBO. So when that ABBO travels undigested into the bloodstream because there's leaky gut, there's holes in the fishing net, it's then floating around in the bloodstream and your immune system is doing what it's meant to do. So we can't blame the immune system, but it shouldn't really be seeing this long string of amino acids or this code in full. It should be broken down into individual pearls. But the thing is that there's parts of the thyroid gland that look similar and have that same pattern, ABBO, within it. So as your body and your immune cells are attacking the gluten and the piece of bread and saying, that's bad, that shouldn't be here, we don't know what that is, we've never seen that before, it will then see parts of the thyroid gland with the same code and think, there it is again, let's keep attacking that. So this is the process of molecular mimicry in relation to the thyroid, but I'm sure this is happening in other conditions as well. We do have control over our leaky gut. It's not easy. It's not easy to have a healthy gut in the modern world, but it is absolutely possible. We can clean up our gut as much as possible. We can go gluten-free. I would recommend that and do think it would be helpful in everyone who has autoimmune or suspects that they have autoimmune. Some people need to take it further and go dairy-free or egg-free, or they might need to go grain-free. They can be useful steps. Long-term, gluten-free might be the main thing, or you might have a strong sensitivity to dairy, or rice might not work for you, and you'll be able to figure that out within time. But if you're reacting to a lot of different foods, that is just a symptom of leaky gut. Long-term, going gluten-free is not going to cause any downsides. There's no risk of going gluten-free. There's nothing in gluten that you can't get elsewhere. And I just don't think the modern gluten molecule and food state is normal anyway. It's just very hybridized and not what it used to be. And bread these days has about 20 ingredients in versus yeast, flour, and water and salt that it used to have. So we do have control over leaky gut. We can do a stool test once a year. We can keep our gut bacteria nice and healthy and balanced. Your stool test is never going to look completely perfect, but if there's a lot of imbalances and you have H. pylori, you have a parasite, you have a yeast overgrowth and SIBO, these can all be linked to autoimmune and can just be further stressing and triggering your immune system. That's also causing damage to the gut lining. You can pay attention to your medication use and see what is the minimal effective dose that you can take, and maybe try some more natural solutions at the same time. You can go gluten-free. You can try to eat organic as much as possible so there's not so many pesticides damaging your gut lining. You can come off the birth control pill if you're still on that. So that's my little spiel on leaky gut. You can work with a practitioner to guide you through a comprehensive gut protocol. It might not be as simple as just going gluten-free and everything heals. You might not even have any digestive symptoms, but still have a really poor gut environment. That's where testing can come in. I offer the GI map stool test because I feel like that's the best one. And you'd be surprised, sometimes the people with the least digestive symptoms have the worst imbalances. The symptoms might be showing up as joint pain, as anxiety, as brain fog. If you do have digestive symptoms, that is even more clear, but don't rule out gut issues just because you don't have an IBS diagnosis. Third thing that you need to have or be diagnosed with an autoimmune condition is some sort of environmental trigger, which is a code word for stress of some kind. This is an umbrella term, but there's typically a point where the genes are turned on, the genes express. So they were there probably the whole time. And this is why you can, as a child, have no symptoms. You don't have autoimmune disease since birth. So that is just proof that it's not something that you are just born with and have forever. Something changed. And some common examples are divorces, breakups, a vaccination, stressful times at work, illnesses, having a viral infection or getting food poisoning on holiday, postpartum, any time of hormonal fluctuation, a toxic exposure, like living somewhere that has mold, metal fillings in your teeth, having them in or having them over time start to degrade and leach mercury into your system. And another one can be surgery. These are some of the big, a car crash could be another one. A major or micro trauma can activate those genes, and you might not get symptoms right away, but this can be the tipping point where it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. You had other issues before, you had the medication use, you had the stress from bullying at school, you've been eating gluten and been through your party season in your 20s, but then it wasn't until you had your first child or you got really sick with COVID in 2020, or you had the VAX, and that was what triggered everything. And some people do have a viral infection and then they never fully recover and always know that that was the tipping point where they felt worse and they just never got to recover after that. But other people might have gone on a trip and had a bit of an upset stomach, but the symptoms didn't start for weeks afterwards and things just got worse over time. So with these environmental triggers, some of them are out of our control. Moving forward, we can work on our mindset and our resilience to stress. We can choose healthier relationships. We can choose not to get certain medical interventions, perhaps. We can change up our work so that we're not working this major stressful corporate job that we hate. We can really take care of ourselves during pregnancy and do preconception work so that hopefully our postpartum experience is better. But there's other things in that we just can't control fully. We can also go back, and if you have been through trauma, if you have had an infection or you have been through a hard breakup, we can process that, we can work on that, and that's also likely necessary to do that. So we have to go back and look at what led to the development of your symptoms and condition in the first place. It wasn't just happening around that time. It wasn't just the months that you got diagnosed. It was the years leading up to that. These seemingly small things just snowballed, and then there was this moment where the straw that broke the camel's back happened, and that's when you think it started, but it was probably going on years before that. And then we also need to look ahead and make sure that we control as much as we can our health and taking care of ourselves and showing up in a way that supports a different reality. Because if you just keep doing the same thing and living the same way and exercising or not exercising like before, you are just asking for the same type of problem. So there can be these radical shifts that are needed to put the condition into remission and avoid future imbalances from happening. Once you do have one autoimmune condition, you are 3 times more likely to develop another. So it is serious. It's important to be aware of that. It's not something that you're commonly told. And you do have a lot of things that you can do to support yourself in this. In the conventional world, it can seem very gloom and doom and that there's not really much hope, but I'm here to tell you that there is a lot that you can do. And it might not be that you ever fully get your antibodies down to 0 for your thyroid again, but as long as you feel good and they're not getting worse over time, to me, that is still a win. And even if the antibodies linger at 100 or something, which isn't super high, but it is still above ideal, but you feel really good and you know how to manage things and you're not really having these big flare-ups anymore and you're feeling pretty stable, that is a success. So if you are wanting to work on your health and you have some of these conditions and symptoms, if you want to prevent this from happening, because that is the most ideal situation where you actually don't have a diagnosis yet, maybe you're not feeling 100% amazing, but you're fine, that is actually the perfect time to intervene and do something. So if you have a family history of one of these conditions, if you have symptoms that you worry could be autoimmune in nature, I would love to help you explore some of these underlying factors and do some testing. Let's figure out what the underlying imbalances are for you because it's different for everyone. I could have 2 people with rheumatoid arthritis or Hashimoto's, and their life and the way that they ended up there is just completely different, and therefore the treatment and the solution is also going to be different as well. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not here to diagnose you, but I have had many clients, even my own mum, who was struggling with symptoms. I suspected that they had an autoimmune condition. We do private testing and we're able to actually find evidence of that. But in order to then have a formal diagnosis, I would refer you to your doctor for that. But the test that I use can be very useful and can give you a lot of insight. So if you feel like you've done some basic tests with your doctor, but they're just not looking deep enough or nothing's been found, I can guarantee something's going to come back on the test that I use. Finally, if you do have an autoimmune disease and you want to work on these underlying gut health connections, the toxic exposure, let's support your detoxification, let's make your body and your immune system more resilient and more balanced, then the link to my one-to-one package, Reprogram, the Restoring Energy program, is going to be in the show notes. On there is a way to book a free 30-minute call with me. If you want to chat further, just tell me more about your situation and if it's a good fit, because there are some more advanced autoimmune states that I don't think I would be a good fit for, so I'll give you my honest advice and refer you on to someone else. So I don't take everyone as a client. I want to make sure that I definitely feel confident that I can help you. No guarantees. You have to do the work as well. You have to put in the work. So it'll be this collaborative experience, but I think there's so much hope. And if you haven't explored this world yet, I really feel like it is the way forward. There is a new payment plan option available as well. There is a down payment followed by lower cost monthly payments for 6 months. So check that out as well on the website. And I would love to chat with you. I hope you found this episode useful. Share it with a friend, a loved one who might be struggling, and just give them some hope and a little bit more education because I feel like this is lacking. And I'll see you here next week for the next episode.